They say all good things must come to an end, and after 6 months, it has finally come time to say goodbye to our Mitsubishi Outlander Aspire PHEV. Over the past 6 months, we've done some serious Ks on this thing, 11,000 in fact. It's gone as far north as Queensland, visited Canberra, spent most of its time in Sydney, but it's even gone as far south as Mitsubishi's home city of Adelaide. In today's video, we're going to talk about what it's like to live with this car, the sort of fuel economy I've been seeing, some things I liked about it, some things I didn't, and ultimately, do I think you should buy this car?
Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
Budget Direct.
So it's a hybrid and all, so let's talk fuel economy. Now, during my time, I've seen an average of 6.9 litres per 100 Ks. However, that number is reflective of more than just the efficiency of the Outlander. It's also reflective of how I've been using it. Now, during my time with this car, most of it I haven't been able to charge it from home, and I've been relying on public charging infrastructure, which carries a lot of its own, let's say, complications. Things like broken down chargers are an unfortunate reality of dealing with charging in Australia. Common courtesy, people leaving their cars parked in there for a long time, has meant it's made it a real challenge to top up the battery when I'm out on the go. Now, as far as more in-depth details, I'm just going to rattle off some numbers now.
So let's say you're not always able to keep the Outlander fully charged and you're driving it around on a flat battery. In those circumstances, I've seen a highway efficiency of around 8.3 litres per 100 Ks and as low as 6.5 litres per 100 Ks in urban areas. Mitsubishi claims the Outlander PHEV has an electric driving range of 84 kilometres, but during my time, I've seen a distance of between 60 and 74 Ks.
However, I recently did an experiment in ideal conditions where I bumped up the tyre pressures and drove at about 70 Ks an hour with not much in the way of interruptions, and I was able to stretch that out to 92 kilometres on a single charge, which is very impressive. However, the one thing that was really hanging over my head during all this electric driving was the fact that this is nearly $63,000, and that's before the tax man gets involved. And that kind of money is not far off a base model Model Y or a Kia EV6, both of which have in excess of 450 kilometres of electric range, or in the case of the Kia, nearly 530, and they do come with a bit of kit as standard. And that really is something to consider if you're looking at a car like this and you're not quite sure if you're ready to make the plunge all the way. I don't know, it's something to consider. So the thing about long-termers is a lot of our driving is just the more normal driving. Yeah, we'll take it out for a dynamic bit here and there, and we'll also like to take them out onto a big road trip and the like, but a lot of it is just commuting to and from work. And it's been during these periods where I've actually come to quite enjoy, particularly the safety capability of the Outlander. It's a pretty comprehensive package. It was tested back in 2022 by ANCAP, and they gave it 5 stars, which we've sort of come to expect as the minimum standard now, and particularly I'd say the minimum standard in a family SUV. And there's been a few things that have really stood out to me. First of all, because it's part of this new crop of SUVs that are coming through the lineup, it comes with features like a front center airbag, which is really great because it aims to prevent, you know, those harsh clashes between the two front passengers, or front passenger and driver, I should say, in the event of an accident. And that was really good peace of mind. As far as other standout things from that test, well, it scored 92% in child occupant protection, which is another great factor for peace of mind. Tuning of the software though, well, it's pretty good. It's not overly restrictive. You know, the lane keep doesn't see you bouncing, zigzagging from each side of the lane, which is not a given in all cars, I will say. And it suited my driving style in that it gave me a little bit of freedom without being too overbearing. Blind spot monitoring, I don't think the tuning of that is great in any car out there. However, it reached a nice balance, I think. But let's get away from safety for a minute and let's talk about what the Outlander PHEV is like to drive. And this has got to be the biggest mixed bag of any other aspect of this car, I've got to say. It's either been it's been pretty good all round, but driving, I do find that I've been going backwards and forwards on how I think about this car during my 6 months. A real highlight is just, you know, you can't argue any other way, is the acceleration. 185 kilowatts of power and 450 Newton meters of torque is just absolutely not hanging about. It takes off like an absolute gun when you're pulling onto the highway, and I will definitely miss that aspect of this car. And it's still, you don't have to have a fully charged battery to get that full shove either, which is really nice to know. However, that's just one aspect of the Outlander's driving. As we've seen recently with our contributor Dan Gardner went to Japan, this thing is actually a real blast when you get it off the bitumen and into some dirt and do a little bit of mild off-roading. It really likes to boogie, and Mitsubishi has done a good job setting up the all-wheel drive system on this car, the super all-wheel control system, as it's called. And that is also really helpful when it comes to dynamic driving. When you really lean hard into the corners, the way that it nips on the front and rear wheels individually to tighten your driving line means you go around corners alarmingly quickly, or certainly much quicker than you expect when you're really giving it the beans. And I was actually really impressed when I was taking it through some of my favorite driving roads when I traveled back to Adelaide at just how capable and quick this thing is. However, the one aspect I've found hard to contend with the Outlander PHEV is its just day-to-day driving ability, because I feel that it's quite compromised when it comes to just going round corners in general. It doesn't really matter as much when you're doing dynamic driving, because you're driving fast and you don't really mind when the car is at an angle, as long as you're having fun and going quickly. However, most people are going to be driving in a relaxed manner, and they're going to be doing their daily commute as I have been doing most of the time. And while it's great on the highway bits of my commute, when I approach the 3 roundabouts that I go around every morning, I'm reminded of the fact that it just doesn't quite have the body control of its rivals. Now, when Mitsubishi puts in all the extra drivetrain, essentially a second drivetrain, and the batteries that come along with it, the Outlander PHEV becomes a heavy beast. It's about 2 tons, and that's up there with some utes. And you can see that in an effort to bring some softness back to the ride of the Outlander, which we did also criticize in the regular petrol version for being a bit too hard, they've perhaps overcorrected, and the result is that the car is just a bit too roly-poly, and that's a bit of a shame. Now, given that they've added all that weight, and also the fact that we've had issues with the regular petrol Outlander on 20-inch wheels for being overly harsh, you can see that Mitsubishi's tried to hit a bit of a compromise in making the ride softer to compensate for that weight and also make sure it's not too harsh. However, that has resulted in a perhaps overly soft ride, and it's a shame they weren't able to hit a better compromise. So let's talk a bit about why this is the case. Now, the Aspire grade that I'm driving comes as 20-inch wheels as standard, and you can get 18s as an option, but 18s are also offered as standard on the lower ES grade. Now, I've driven that ES, and it was really interesting to back those cars, because while the ES is a bit more forgiving in terms of bumps, unfortunately, when it comes to body control, it's that much bit worse. And for that reason, I would stick with the 20s on the Aspire, because personally for me, I prefer that much better body control in exchange for some of the harshness that the 20-inch wheels provide. However, I think it's also worth saying that at this price point, at $63,000 before taxes, I don't think adaptive dampers are out of the question for this car. Volkswagen runs them on the Tiguan, and we see them on numerous hot hatches that are cheaper than this car, of course, without that electric drivetrain technology. So I think it's worth considering, and I really wish we could at least see them on the higher Exceed and Exceed Tourer grades, because I think it would give a much better balance between that comfort, which can be really great in this car at times on the right wheels, and the body control, which unfortunately just does need a little bit more work. And that brings me to my next point, which is grand touring ability. Now, this car's done quite a lot of highway miles. Myself, I took it to Adelaide and back, which we've discussed previously, and my colleague, Zach Adkins, he's driven all the way to Brisbane and back in this thing. And we both agree that this is a quiet, comfortable vehicle, which also has a lot of punch when you want to go for those overtakes on the country roads, and all of that does count for a lot. However, as we discussed earlier, the highway efficiency of this thing isn't as great as something you might see in a diesel, and that's a little bit disappointing in something that's meant to save you money. Add to that the fact that the boot is probably on the smaller side, you can't always bring everything you probably want, and the fact that it still doesn't have a spare wheel under here, and that latter point is really not all that great for peace of mind. Potentially one of the biggest things that the Outlander has going for it is the fact that it's just very easy to use every day. The touchscreen is intuitive and the climate controls aren't buried in it. They've got their own buttons and knobs down here, which is very much appreciated. And also, as we've spoken about before, those back seats are great for kids. The doors open really wide open. You're able to get baby seats in there without much hassle at all. And it's just generally a very easy car to live with. I think it's also worth mentioning the quality of the Outlander in here. Yes, it does have some cheaper materials like gloss black, which we all hate, but unfortunately it is here, but at least it's built well. It's all put together nicely. Now, as it stands right now, I've got 13,000 Ks on this car, 11 of which I've done myself. And this is the first long-termer I've had. I'm on number 3 now, where I've returned it with no major rattles or technical glitches that have happened during that time. And I think that's really commendable. I think it also goes to a wider point about warranty. Now, it's my personal belief that a warranty is an ultimate sign of a manufacturer believing in their product. They're willing to say, if something goes wrong during this time, we're willing to put our hand in our pocket and pay up. However, we don't think it will, so you're welcome to have this peace of mind for that time. And of course, that is a major advantage of Mitsubishi's industry-leading, if conditional, 10-year and 200,000 kilometer warranty that does require you to get your car serviced at Mitsubishi dealers. However, in the Aspire grade in particular, I will note that there's been a few times where I've gone, I think there could have been a little bit less stingy when it comes to specs. Namely, that comes down to things like, I really feel like a car at this price point should have fully leather seats. And while I do quite like this synthetic suede and leatherette material they've got on here, they're quite a nice shape, but it's just, it would be nice to have that little bit extra. And if you've got perhaps kids that are a little bit older and they're slinging around liquids everywhere, that's probably the option you'd go for in the Exceed. I'd also like to see some power adjustment on the front passenger seat. I think that would have been a really nice touch. And as I said before, adaptive dampers would have been a really great fitment on this car that I think could provide some great balance between body control and harshness. Finally, I've done a lot of traffic in this car and I've used the adaptive cruise control a lot. And while it is well tuned for what it is, it doesn't have the traffic jam assist, which is Mitsubishi's language for the essentially low speed adaptive cruise control. So it can come to a complete stop and then set off again. And I really would have preferred to have seen that in this car. During my 6 months with this car, I've come to appreciate and agree that this Outlander PHEV is a convincing middle ground between the petrol and diesel cars that most people own today and the fully electric vehicles that seem to make up our tomorrow. And a big part of that is to do with the 70+ kilometers of electric driving range, which I've seen in this car and does allow you to do most of your driving around town without actually using any petrol at all. It's also worth noting that this is one of few cars that you can get as a 7-seater and drive around on electric power most of the time. And while there are some options like the Mercedes-Benz EQB and the incoming Kia EV9, those vehicles are likely to cost a lot more than this one. So would I buy one? And if so, which one would I get? Well, funnily enough, I'd get the one that's standing right behind me. That is the Aspire grade in PHEV trim, and specifically on those 20-inch wheels, which, as I said before, do give you that little bit extra body control. However, if you're a parent and you need a little bit more waterproofing in your seat areas and also like the sound of those pull-up sunshades, it might be worth looking to the Exceed grade. However, do I think you should buy one? Well, that depends on one very important question, and that is, do you have a means to charge this car at least once every 2 days? Because if you don't, you are simply not going to see the benefits out of this car that it's designed to give. Because once that battery goes flat, the efficiency you see is simply not as good as some other rivals we've seen. It would be great to see if Mitsubishi could tap its sibling brand Nissan on the shoulder and ask to borrow their e-power technology to offer in the Outlander that would provide not only a cheaper hybrid option, but something you don't have to plug in every day. However, as it stands, the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV does offer some really compelling advantages, as I've spoken about today, and it would be my pick between those two drivetrain technologies, but that's also to do with my personal situation. Tell me what you think about this Outlander PHEV. Do you think it would work with your lifestyle at the moment? Let me know in the comments down below. But for now, that's all. Thanks for watching Chasing Cars.